Why is there, well, anything? Why do we have a universe filled with stars and galaxies and us instead of just nothing? A total, complete, empty void.
Well, one of the most famous attempts to answer this goes way back to medieval Islamic thinkers. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. Okay, so how does it work? Think of it like a chain of logical dominoes. The first one is pretty simple. Things happen in order, one after the other, right? But then it makes a really bold claim. It says that chain of events can't go back forever into the past. And if that's true, well, that means the universe must have had a beginning. For the final step, the argument says, look, anything that begins to exist has to have a cause. So, the universe must have a cause.
So, that first point, that time happens in a sequence. Yeah, nobody really argues with that. But that second idea, that the past can't be infinite, that's the controversial one. And to really get why, we have to wrestle with the seriously mind-bending concept of infinity.
So what about that big claim, that an infinite past is impossible? You might think, hey, doesn't modern science back this up? And at first glance, it really seems to. I mean, the Big Bang Theory tells us the universe exploded into being roughly 14 billion years ago. That sounds a lot like a beginning.
This brings us to a really significant objection from the philosopher David Hume, which takes direct aim at that premise about infinite regress.
Hume's point is that the claim an infinite series of causes is impossible isn't a necessary truth. He argues that the idea of an infinite regress doesn't seem to contain an obvious logical contradiction, not in the way a statement like a triangle has four sides does. Since we can conceive of an infinite series without it seeming immediately contradictory, Hume says we're not justified in ruling it out as a possibility. He basically says if every individual link in the chain is explained by the one before it, we don't need a separate explanation for the chain as a whole.
So in response to Hume, defenders of Aquinas' argument shift the focus. They move away from what is conceivable to what is logically possible. The key philosophical issue here is really about two different types of infinity. There's what's called a potential infinity, which is a series you can always add one more to, like counting numbers. You could do it forever. But then there's an actual infinity, which would be a completed existing set that already contains an infinite number of things. Aquinas' argument is that an actual infinite series of past causes just can't exist in reality. The whole concept of an actual infinity seems to lead to some bizarre logical paradoxes. Take Hilbert's Hotel as an analogy. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and every single room is occupied, so it's full. But if a new guest arrives, the hotel can still make room by having every guest move to the room with the next highest number. This creates a logical contradiction. The hotel is somehow both full and not full at the same time. These kinds of paradoxes are used to argue that the idea of an actual infinity is logically incoherent, so it can't exist in the real world. The reply makes a really sharp distinction between what's conceivable and what's logically possible. Sure, we might be able to imagine an infinite series, but the reply argues that its actual existence would lead to logical contradictions, like we saw with Hilbert's Hotel. And since anything that involves a contradiction is logically impossible, an actual infinite series of causes simply cannot exist, regardless of whether we can conceive of it or not.
Hume has another objection, this time to that third premise, that claims that everything that begins to exist has a cause. If this premise is not justified, then the conclusion does not follow.
He says, okay, this whole argument hangs on the idea of causation. But what if causation isn't some iron law of the universe? What if it's just a habit, something our brains made up? So to make his point, Hume uses this tool that we now call Hume's fork. It basically splits all human knowledge into two buckets. In one bucket, you have relations of ideas. These are logical truths. A bachelor is an unmarried man. A triangle cannot have four sides. You know this without ever looking at the world. In the other bucket, you have matters of fact, stuff you only know from experience, like you know the sun rises in the east because you've seen it. Now here's the kicker. Hume says the idea that every effect has a cause doesn't fit in either bucket. It's not a logical truth. You can totally imagine something just popping into existence. And it's not something we can ever really prove from experience either. Hume uses his famous example of two billiard balls, and he puts it this way. An observer could not pronounce that the one event was connected, but only that it was conjoined with the other. So when you watch one ball strike another, what are you really seeing? Think about it. You see the first ball moving, then you see it touch the second ball, and then you see the second ball move. You see event A, then you see event B.
They are conjoined, one after the other, but you never, ever see the causation. You don't see the mysterious force that connects them. You just assume it's there because you've seen it happen 1,000 times. It's a feeling, a mental habit.
So for Hume, our deep-seated belief in cause and effect isn't a law of physics. It's just a strong instinct our brains developed, and instincts can be wrong. But even more importantly, he says, even if this rule works for billiard balls inside the universe, who gave us permission to apply that same rule to the universe itself? The creation of the whole universe is a totally unique event. It only happened once. We haven't seen a bunch of universes being created to build up that habit of seeing a cause.